I'm still blown away from seeing the symphony, and it was 4 days ago. I saw Mahler's Symphony Number 2, and I prepared for it by analyzing the symphony, listening to it multiple times, actually paying attention to when the ending of each movement is, when the beginning of the next one is, so I actually knew where I was and stuff. I heard it enough times to know the story, but then digging into it, I realized there's a lot of backstory in this symphony. There's a lot to it, so this video is getting into that and Mahler and my reaction to the symphony as a whole. Okay, so first of all, the symphony is called the Resurrection Symphony, Symphony Number 2 by Mahler. Not sure if the entire symphony is about this or if it's the fourth and the fifth movement are mainly about this, because this is where you find the text, but the symphony is called the Resurrection Symphony. So let's talk about some of the stuff that's in it. If you look up Der Messias by Klopstock and Mahler, you'll find some things. First, you'll find the Der Messias by Klopstock Wikipedia article, which we'll dig into, and then you'll find this Friedrich Klopstock, and you can click on that, and that will take you to the Mahler Foundation website. And on here, when you go to the top, you'll see it talks about this Klopstock figure, and it is the Mahler Foundation website, a whole website about Mahler. In this, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll get to the point that it talks about how Klopstock was a German poet. His best-known work was his epic poem, Der Messias, translated English, The Messiah. And he was a well-known poet of the day. He studied the classical poetry of the time, and he wrote this poem, Der Messias. So in this, if you keep scrolling down a little while and you get to the part where it says Gustav Mahler, you could also do Control F and type Gustav Mahler or Mahler, and you'll find the section. And it says that it was hearing Klopstock's hymn, it's this hymn in German, I probably wouldn't pronounce it very well, at the funeral of Hans von Berlo, 1830 to 1894. In 1894, that gave Gustav Mahler the inspiration for the final movement of his Symphony Number 2. Mahler incorporated the hymn with extra verses he wrote himself to bring a resolution to this mighty, problematic work. Okay, so further on the Der Messias Wikipedia article, we already saw that it was called an epic poem. So what is an epic poem? First of all, let's familiarize ourselves with that. An epic poem, or simply an epic, is a lengthy narrative poem typically about the extraordinary deeds of an extraordinary character who, in dealing with gods or other superhuman forces, gave shape to the mortal universe for their descendants. So you could get a backstory of that, so it's an epic poetry. It doesn't mean that it's just an epic poem, which it is. So then we get into the Wikipedia article. I'm just going to get into this a little bit because it's interesting. It says the poem consists of 19,458 dactylic hexameters, as compared with the 15,698 of Homer's Iliad. Then you can actually go to this dactylic hexameter, and you can see it says that it's a form of meter or rhythmic scheme frequency used in ancient Greek and Latin poetry, and it shows you the rhythm scheme. Then furthermore, I found this piece online, Der Messias by Andreas Romberg, which you can actually see I translated on my playlist account in the description. Let's read it. A translation of the description for those who do not speak German. The Messiah, a cantata in 3 parts for soloist, choir, and orchestra, based on excerpts 1782 by Johann Friedrich Reichardt from the poem of the same name, Der Messias, 1748 through 1743 by Friedrich Klopstock. So this is basically a further development on the poem, and it's a very nice piece. I highly recommend it. Okay, so there's a little backstory on the piece itself, and then here we can see an actual performance by Leonard Bernstein and the London Symphony Orchestra with a huge instrumental orchestra, and you have 2 soloists. You have an alto and a soprano, and you have a full choir section, and it looks like they probably have over 100 here. And the one I saw was basically the same thing as this, or if not the same thing, And I would say it was a very similar effect. I've watched this and heard this multiple times, and what I heard that day was this, but live. And hearing this live is so powerful, you'd have no idea. So, first of all, you have an entire orchestra of probably about 150 instrumental players. Okay? That's it by themselves. And like I was saying, you have the two soloists, professional opera singers. And then you have a whole choir section of about 100 people. And I counted it, I'm pretty sure exactly 96. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's 96 choir singers. And then I compared that to the amount of players. And like I was saying, it was at least, I think, 150 instrumentalists, maybe around 200. It was a lot. But basically, it was a very profound, life-changing experience. And I wanted to talk about it, to share my experience on here. Anyone that watches this, to say what I felt and how I was basically moved by it. So, it being called the resurrection, I knew that it was going to be about Jesus Christ and him rising, the resurrection. And interestingly enough, I couldn't find the exact translation for what I saw live. When I saw it live, the first text that opened up, it was the alto singer, and she was singing a line that said, "We as humanity are in dark, troubled times." And I would say this is very interesting because in the beginning of the symphony, just how the symphony starts in the music, it was almost speaking to me and gave me this eerie feeling of kind of darkness. And I was wondering exactly what that was. And I think it's very descriptive for the feeling of death, which the symphony highlights a lot, very powerfully. Life, death, and afterlife, it all connects it. And basically in the beginning, how it's saying we're in very troubled times as humans, I found that very interesting because that relates to now. But also, as we know, history repeats itself, and music echoes this. You can hear music from different time periods, and you can find so many different time periods of music that especially lyricism really tells a lot. They'll tell you certain things that reflect the day and age now. And you can find it, like I was saying, in many different generations, and it literally shows how history repeats itself. But then the lyrics further on, and I'm going to show you the translation a little bit, they talk about how you were not born into this vein, into this darkness, and furthermore, you must rise out of it. And it talks about many things. Basically, the theme and the conclusion of it is that death is inevitable. Everything that lives must die. And also, furthermore, death is the catalyst for the afterlife. In order to reach the eternal afterlife, you have to die. And that's what this piece is highlighting very powerfully too. And it builds up to it to where in the fourth movement, you have the opera singer coming in and singing some lines. And then in the fifth movement, you have the entire choir section with the two opera singers. And they slowly come together to where at the very end, the two opera singers are singing interweaving lines where they're actually singing a line that you can hear the words that they're saying, but they're contrapuntally interweaving their voices. It's very complex. Choir singers are belting out their voices at basically probably the highest dynamic that they can, the loudest dynamic that they can. And then you have the same thing with the orchestra and the instruments. They're belting out the lowest and the highest pitches and the loudest dynamics that they can. And what they're saying, let me actually get into the translation here, it's at the very end. They're saying, "With the wings that I've gained, I shall rise, I shall die to live. Arise, yes, you shall rise again, my heart in no time. What you have beaten, to God it will bear you." You're hearing this orchestra and symphony and these singers, and very loudly, like as loud as you can almost hear. And it's, I don't know how to describe it other than reminiscent of wartime music with Mahler. He does a lot of these things where you hear this wartime and funeral music, and I'd say it's almost both of those mixed together with the loudest possible sound that you can comprehend, with so many things happening. And it's saying, "I shall die to live." And it's just so powerful hearing that and seeing it in person. And then how it's the pieces, talking about how basically you must reach the eternal afterlife through dying. And just highlighting that and hearing it so loudly, it's getting projected into your face. I would say there's not one piece that I have ever heard in my entire life that connected me to God like this piece. And basically, I had a lot of profound insights when listening to this piece live, and it felt almost like an extremely professional church service where you'd have the choir singing the hymn or whatever it was, but this was a whole story about life, death, afterlife, resurrection. Okay, so very powerful stuff there, and I was basically sitting there getting my mind blown the entire time. But I would say that even without the lyricism, which adds a lot to it, the instrumental part is already mind-blowing enough. What he does with the instruments and the harmony is insane. And if you know your symphonies, you know your classical, you know your romantic symphonies, you hear a lot of things that build up to moments that kind of sound like something maybe classical, something maybe romantic, but he does something totally crazy with it. He'll send it to outer space, to another planet, to another dimension or something, and then he'll bring it back to something so beautiful, and you'll be in this super beautiful, elegant period just to get taken to this aggressive, stomping wartime period, and it'll all work so well together. And like I was saying, just hearing that all is really mind-blowing, to be honest. So let's get into the actual text. By Lyric Translate, I found something that has the German and then also the English translation next to it, but I'll say that the Houston Symphony website also has a translation of Mahler Symphony 2, and I would say that this one is more accurate to what I saw as the translation when I saw it live. But with that, you can actually see both them side by side on the Lyric Translate website. But let's get into the English translation. Okay, so first has the English translation of Klopstock. I'll first go through that just so you know what the piece was about. It says, "Arise, yes, you will rise from the dead. My dust after a short rest. Eternal life will be given you by him who calls to you. To bloom again you are sown. The Lord of the harvest goes and gathers the sheaves, us who have died." So reminiscent to probably not our generation. You can see it's worded a little differently. It has an older feeling to it. And then here's what Mahler wrote for his symphony. "Oh, believe, my heart, oh, believe, nothing will be lost to you. Everything is yours that you have desired, yours what you have loved, what you have struggled for. Oh, believe, you were not born in vain, you have not lived in vain, suffered in vain. What was created must perish. What has perished must rise again. Tremble no more, prepare yourself to live." That was a very powerful moment of this symphony. It was saying, what has perished must rise again. What is created must perish. And it's saying, prepare yourself to live. That was very powerful. Prepare yourself to live. And then the instruments are heightening this experience. And then it says, "O sorrow, all penetrating, I have been wrested away from you. O death, all conquering, now you are conquered. With wings that I have won, in the passion striving of love, I shall mount to the light which no sight has penetrated. I shall die so as to live. Arise, yes, you shall rise from the dead. My heart in an instant, what you have conquered will bear you to God." Gustav Mahler. So just reading that, hearing that, it's powerful in itself, but hearing that super loud with 100 choir singers, all in perfect, beautiful harmony, singing that to you with the whole 150 to 200 instrumental orchestra all doing this beautiful harmony and beautiful chords. When I was watching, I was thinking, this is reminiscent of heaven. It's like they're bringing heaven to earth. And of course, I haven't been to heaven, so I can't say what that's like, but I could say the sound was so beautiful, and it made me feel that basically my fear of death was not a problem in this moment. That I could see that, yes, that this life is a moment of time, and that one day I will die. And when I die, then that will be the end of this life on earth, and I will go to the afterlife. So it really made me feel alright about that, which I would say on most days, even right now, I feel pretty unsettled about that feeling that I'm gonna die one day. I'm gonna go, I'm gonna be gone from this earth, from this reality, and that can be a very unsettling feeling. But it can also be a very sobering feeling when you grasp this reality and you understand this is inevitable, this is a part of life, and furthermore, it brings you to the afterlife. So, feeling content about that was not just a powerful moment, but it was life changing. This symphony was life changing, and I don't know if I've ever heard any piece of music, especially live, in my entire life that made a profound difference on my perspective as this, which I feel like, as I saw a comment, someone saying that the symphony makes them feel conquered of the fear of death, as I was describing. And yes, that's basically how I felt when I was listening to it. And that's very powerful. So, 4 days after, I'm still in shock from what I saw. I still wake up in the morning and think, wow, I can't believe I saw that. And furthermore, that Mahler was able to write that, people were able to read it and play it. I think the biggest thing to really take away from all that is some guy was sitting in a small shack writing all that on a piece of paper. And the effect is just extraordinary. It's something that I've never experienced in my entire life. So I would really recommend, if you see a Mahler symphony around you, you should definitely go and see it. So another thing I want to bring up is that on the translation of what I see on these websites, it doesn't mention anything about what I saw in the beginning where I was saying we're in dark times right now as humanity or something of those terms, which was the opening line of when I saw the symphony. So I think that these translations might just be from the fifth movement, is what I'm getting from it. And furthermore, I went to this website, which it's genius actually, but they had a bunch of more lyrics on here, and they actually had each movement separated. They show you that the first one's sonata form, you have exposition, development, recapitulation, and they show you the second, the third, and the fourth movement. They actually show you lyrics from the fourth movement, which I didn't find in the translation from the other two websites that I showed you. Furthermore, it shows you lyrics from the fifth movement, and in the beginning, I didn't find any of these lyrics either. Only up until this part is actually in the other translation. This is where the other translations start. So I found that kind of interesting, and you also have a translation of this. I translated it just to see what it means. So we have the fourth movement, and we see what that has. I'm not going to read this one. If you want to read it, there it is. And then in the fifth movement translated, here's what the fifth movement translated had. And the other thing is, I'm not sure if this is what's in Bernstein's version or not, because in Bernstein's version you have some lyrics in the fourth movement, but then again, all the websites looks like they're just showing the lyrics from the fifth movement. But then when I saw it live, I saw different lyrics. So I'm not sure what exactly is going on there, but there's definitely some mystery there that I'm a little bit confused about. Alright, so that's it for this video. I just really wanted to share with you this experience of seeing the symphony, and it's hard to really put it into words other than summing it up as it profoundly changed my life and my perspective, and honestly I feel at peace after having this experience. I'm going to now take a video about some counterpoint responses, florid counterpoint responses, so be sure to check that out. Along with, exciting enough, I'm actually writing my first violin sonata for violin and piano, so that's coming along pretty well. I have basically the beginning of the first movement already written. I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to make it a big sort of one sonata piece, is what it maybe seems like it's going at. But I think I'm going to go for a 4-movement or maybe 3-movement violin sonata, and trying to figure out exactly where I'm going with it. But basically I already have a good amount written, and I'm going to show you a preview of that soon, so I'm excited to share that with you. And then also, once I actually have the piece written, I'm going to go through how I wrote it, how I started with a simple piano idea, just bass and soprano idea. I actually originally started with a bass line, which then I wrote soprano above it, and then I started creating variations of that, and then putting stuff into violin, putting certain things into piano, and I started slowly coming up with the piece. So I'm excited to share that with you, how I created that, things that I learned to understand to actually be able to do that, and then along with some other things too, like writing for the violin, where I have a sort of cheat sheet where you can just look at it and you can say, okay, if I want to write these notes for a violin, let's say I want to write a chord for a violin, a quadruple stop, let's say, and you can use this sort of cheat sheet to basically say if it's going to be playable or not to make sense of it. Okay, so a lot of exciting things coming up. Stay tuned. Subscribe if you want to see more. Like the video if you liked it. And until next time, goodbye.